Thank you. Okay, well, hello everybody. So happy to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about who does what and discuss the nuances that separate different types of editors and proofreaders in particular, and agents. I'm so excited. I'm even wearing my editing big fluffy cardigan that I wear whenever I choose to edit. But before we get started, I think it would be just awesome for each of our panelists to just kind of take a moment and introduce themselves. I think you will all do a much better job than I probably could. Sometimes I overshare and embarrass people. So, but if you don't brag about yourself enough, I might hop in. But Holli, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I'm Holli Anderson. I am an author. I have 7 books out. There are 6 books out. The 7th is coming out in April. But I'm also the chief editor of Immortal Works Press. That's it.
Great. Fabulous. Wonderful. And then Emma, how about you?
Okay. I'm Emma Hegam. I am the managing editor at Future House Publishing, where we work on family-friendly science fiction, fantasy, and middle-grade adventures.
Awesome. And then I think Julie is still connecting, so I will...
I'm here.
Oh, can you hear us? Great. Your camera is showing us some squares. But we can hear you just fine. So go ahead, and why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, Julie?
Oh, strange. I'm Julie Wright. I am the managing editor for Sunwire, and I run their online magazine, and I have 25 books that I've written and 16 that I've published, and my 17th is coming out in just a couple of weeks. So I'm kind of excited. That would be, I'm kind of excited about that. So
that's fabulous. Yeah, we will. Yeah, I would love to even get some more information from each of you about your titles. Maybe we can even just spend a little bit of time at the end, making sure everybody knows where they can find more about you. But Troy, how about you? Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
So my name is Troy Lambert. I am a freelance writer, author, editor, and I own a small niche press at the moment. For this panel, my editing background is that I was initially just a standard editor for a publisher out of Ireland. Then I was a managing editor of a series. Then I went on to be the senior editor for that publisher. And then I've done a lot of freelance editing since. I was acquisitions editor for a while. And as I often say when I say that in my spiel, some of you owe me an apology. Others of you owe me cash.
That's great. Thanks for that. There is such a breadth of knowledge here, which is really exciting. But what I am particularly excited about is we've got different experiences from lots of corners of the publishing community just here on the panel, and a lot of experiences I hope we can gain some insight from. Why don't we start even and just kind of, Troy, for example, you just mentioned 3 or 4 different types of editing positions that you have been in. So kind of question for the panel, the term editor, if you had to define it in our professional track here, how do you define the term editor? What does it to you?
So very broadly, I would say that an editor is someone who works with the author and the publisher, or in some cases, in the case of a freelance author, an indie publisher, to basically hone the author's story and prepare it for publication. So to make it basically viable as a consumer product. And that's the broadest definition. Then after that, you get into individual editor type definitions.
Wonderful. Does anybody want to add to that, or they feel like it's a pretty good... We're going to give Troy a pass, or Julie, is that you speaking?
I think Troy did a great job. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then this is just an aside for everybody. I have the chat server open for Discord for everyone here, and I will be kind of glancing over. So if you have just dying questions, I will look over and we can maybe get some of those in. But okay, so wonderful definition of an editor. Let's talk then. It sounds like editors are intermediaries. They're working with and ideally for the author's benefit. A lot of authors may lose track of that when working with editors, but they're on your team. How does that differentiate then from, let's start with an agent. What's the difference between an agent and an editor?
So I'm going to take that really fast. My agent is my advocate in all things, and he's the one who helps me to make sure that my contracts give me a fair shake, whereas my publisher isn't necessarily when you're dealing with a contract is meant to protect the publisher more than it is meant to protect the writer. And so my agent makes sure that it is fair on both sides so that I'm not getting taken advantage of, and he makes sure that he puts me in front of deals, and he makes things happen for me in a great way. I don't know what I'd do without him, honestly.
And agents, they shop your book around, right, for you. So instead of you submitting it to the publishers, the agent does that whole submissions process for you, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and from a publisher side of things, it's much easier for us to work with agents because they've already vetted the author. First of all, they know they have a great story, and it's also they know the ins and outs of contracts. Exactly what Julie was saying. So we can negotiate with them because they know the terms that we're talking about and stuff like that. Often with an individual author, especially if they're new, they may not be familiar with some of those things that are in contracts and why they're there. And agents are just, it makes the process smoother and simpler for the author and for the publisher on both sides.
I would just like to clarify, that's if you have a good agent who knows what they're doing. There are a lot of bad agents out there who come in and put in nonsense like in your contract that like legally literally means nothing. And I've seen some of those out there. So if you have one of those, they are not helpful and they are not making it easier on anybody.
Yes, I've had non-helpful agents before. Nice thing about having an agent, though, is then you have somebody who can, if you have a good agent, you have somebody who can be the bad guy to your publisher. So you can maintain a great relationship with your editor and your publishing company because you're not the one that's fighting with them. That's your agent doing that. And so they still like you, even if they think that your agent stinks. I mean, so it's awesome. It helps you somebody else is fighting and you still get to have a good relationship. So that's good.
That is wonderful. We've got, I think, what is a great question here from one of our viewers, Kiri, asking, how do you know you have found a good agent as an author? What is it? What are the warning signs, I guess, in those early conversations with an agent that might tip you off? The agent might be very bothersome to the publisher and actually hamper your chances of getting a good deal.
I think there's a few. And I'll just cover one of them. And one of them is if you find an agent that actually just works with one publisher or one or two publishers, they're no longer an agent. They're an intermediary for that publisher. And I've seen this a lot where an agent really has only one or two publishers that they go to and they don't really shop your stuff around. So what they're really doing is just headhunting for that publisher. So usually they're too close, and that doesn't make for a good overall experience for you because one of your stories may fit that publisher extremely well. The other ones may not.
That's great. You said it exactly right. That it's good to know, and something you can do ahead of time when you get that offer from an agent, you can ask them, who are you going to send this out to? Who do you have in mind for this book? Give me a list of publishers that you're planning on sending it to. And if they don't have a list, that's a huge red flag. If they can't give you a list of places where they are going to send it, they don't have those relationships with those publishers, then that's probably a red flag that's not going to be a good fit for you.
That is some great advice. And then something that you mentioned, Troy, just a second ago, you mentioned that when publishers are working with agents, the agents often know that they've got a great story on their hands. And that might blur the line, at least as far as experience goes between perhaps some editors and some agents. Do you feel that some editors kind of take that fork in the road and they become agents, or what's the career path really for these individuals? What should you be looking for on their pedigree? Now, it's a specific question for a broad group of individuals, I know, but
I would say some editors actually become agents. Some agents actually become editors. I don't think there's necessarily a clear path other than experience in the publishing industry. So when an agent is first starting out, usually they're working with someone else as a mentor or as a part of an agency or something like that. Or they've got some experience. They've already got some good connections within the industry. Because somewhere, you've got to have somewhere to shop those things around, kind of like we've been talking about. And often agents too specialize. They specialize in specific genres or things like that. And so that's something to look for too. If this agent has never represented a book in your genre before, they may not have the place to put it that you would want. So you really need to be, it's a matter of, it needs to be a fit between the author and the agent. And I don't think that there's a certain career path to look for other than if this person came out of an agency, or if they are a part of an agency, or if they have a vast amount of experience in the publishing industry. Really, that's going to be where it's at. I don't think it's about a degree or anything like that. I think it's about really real world experience.
Yeah, connections and experience. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's shift gears then a little bit, and let's talk about. I think the title of our session is actually, in some ways, it's almost like a funnel down the publishing line, which I like. Right, where you have agents, editors, copyeditors, proofreaders. So let's talk about this next category, editors, and this is an editor without a prefix, right? Where does the editor fall on kind of the timeline for your book, and what is it that you should expect from an editor?
I'll take
as far as timeline goes. Oh, sorry.
I would just say, sorry. I would just say that the first person in line that you're going to talk, that you're not even ever going to meet, more than likely, unless they also end up being your editor, is the acquisitions editor, who's going to read your submission either from you or your agent and determine whether it's a go or a no go. And that's the first editor in your timeline. But many times, unless that editor wears more than one hat in the publishing world, and in big publishers, that may be a summer intern. It may not even be a regular editor. Is the acquisitions editor. That's the first one in your timeline, but you may never know who that is or meet them. The way you meet them may be an email that says, "Sorry, thanks for submitting. Try again."
Great. And then Holly, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that, especially when you're a new author, my first experience with an editor was me hiring somebody to edit my first book before I started sending it out anywhere. And boy, did I need it. And I am so glad that I did. So, and that was beyond the beta readers, beyond my critique group, beyond, that was after it had been through all of that. I hired a freelance editor to fix it. And it got picked up. So I highly recommend that if you are a newer writer that's never been through that process before. And then once your book is picked up, then you will be assigned a specific editor to work with, to revise and to just make your book better.
And I would second that from a publisher standpoint. I would second that in saying, please hire a freelance editor before you submit to agents and editors and publishers. Please. First of all, you're much more likely to be successful. Second of all, I will drink less. So
kind of going along with that, the initial editor that you might hire yourself before an agent or a publisher can be really helpful if you're not kind of used to the industry at all and you don't know the genre and just kind of what publishers are looking for and stuff. They can help you really nail those elements of your manuscript. So you have your story, but they can be like, oh yeah, like publishers are looking for these sort of things. Let's try to highlight that. Let's try to make sure that those elements are present. Let's try to make sure we're hitting these certain plot points and stuff, so that when an agent or a publisher gets it, they're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And editors will help you know those things that you might not know yet because you're a new author. So that can be really important before you get to the publisher.
Thank you. We've got what I think is a really great question, a really practical question here from our viewers. And I will add just a little bit to it. We're talking about some freelance editors that you can hire as an author to help improve your manuscript before it gets in front of some gatekeepers. Where can you find those freelance editors, and about what do you, I know this is a big range, but what do you think is kind of our going professional rate for a freelance editor?
Oh my.
As finding them, I picked mine up on the recommendation. So I went to my very first writers conference. I went to the Pacific Northwest Writers Conference. I'm not from there, but my book was based there, and I wanted to go visit anyway, so I went there. So basically, that was on the recommendation from several other authors that I had spoken with. So I knew he was good. I knew he knew what he was doing, and that's all he did. That was his day job, and the fact that so I sent him like the first 3 chapters. He edited those for free, got an idea of how long it was going to take him, and then quoted me how much it was going to cost. So I felt like he was very professional, and that he wasn't just trying to take me for a ride. So I think writers' conferences are good places to find out, to ask the rest, ask other authors, ask other publishers who they would recommend.
I think that's actually where I got, when I was starting out and I was looking for freelance editors, it was through writers conferences. That it's actually even how I met my agent and ultimately my publisher. And that writers conferences are a huge boon to the industry. They're just really great. Another place you can go to look for a freelance editor would be to go to join writing groups on social media, and to then ask them, who do you trust? Who would be great for a young adult science fiction or for an adult fantasy? They will have that advice that they can give you, and they're people who've already been there, they've already hired them, so you can get good recommendations that way.
Another thing, if you're, don't have a lot of connections with the community and you're pretty new, if you go to like editing companies that you can just find online that have lots of editors, they can help you find the editor for the genre that you do, the level of editing that you need, and then they'll have, lots of people. So you don't just have to pick one and hope that they're actually good. Or things like the Utah Freelance Editors Association, or stuff like that.
Oh, and that reminded me, Emma, that thank you. Something that's good to do, because it would be really unfortunate to spend a lot of money doing a full edit with somebody who's not really catching your vision. So there are a lot of editing companies where they will do a trial run for like 10 pages free or whatever. And then you can see if this editor style matches your style as a writer, and if they're catching your vision in the same way. That's something that you can test out. You can learn a lot about yourself as a writer and about an editor in a 10-page edit. So check around and see if you can find places that will do that, so that you can make a decent match.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a fabulous point, Julie.
Yeah, and Julie's absolutely right. It really is about a match between the author and the editor, kind of like the same thing with agents. You don't want to work with an editor, especially on a freelance basis, kind of pre-publisher, pre-agent, or if you're going to self-publish especially, so you're going to go through a long editing process with that editor. You don't want to do it with somebody you don't like, and that doesn't really catch your vision. And so that's pretty tough. To answer the second part of the question about cost, is the variance is huge depending upon the experience of the editor, but usually there's a per word cost typically, and it usually varies depending upon the type of editing that you need for your book. And that's really a part of what that evaluation is for. On a freelance basis, I don't do as much freelance editing as I used to, but I do some, and the very first thing I do is an evaluation, is a test edit and an evaluation. Do you like me? Do I like you? Can we actually work together? And also, how much work and how many hours is this going to take me? And what level of editing do you need? And that changes the cost of the editing significantly. If you need a deep developmental edit still because you're still lost in the plot world, then, we have a lot of work to do. And so, that definitely factors in.
That's great. if I can then shift gears just slightly with the editor conversation, we've talked a little bit, both Julie and Troy, about making sure that your editor is a good match. And so I just wanted to ask the panel, and I'm looking for answers from both sides, both from the editor perspective, but also from the writer perspective. Where are some like early warning signals that the relationship is headed toward divorce, so to speak, right? What are some things that you should be paying attention to that editors are doing that are maybe maybe not great signs that it's going to be a positive relationship? And on the flip side, what are some self-checks you should be doing as a writer to ensure that you are not eventually costing yourself more money because you're slowing down the progress with an editor?
I guess I would start with one of the number one things is your author voice. You have an author voice, right? And the editor, as much as they want to edit for grammar and things like the punctuation and all those different things like that, they shouldn't edit out your author voice, especially in areas like dialogue and stuff like that. So grammar and all those things are important, but so is your voice coming through as an author. And so if after an edit you feel like they just changed this, they basically told me to change this to be something that would be their book, not my book anymore, then that's probably a point where you need to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm sure you're very good at, these particular areas of editing, but as far as on a developmental side, I don't want my author voice to disappear. And that's one of the trickiest things as an editor, is to edit to and preserve that author voice at the same time.
Great. Anything else from anybody?
I don't know. I also feel like if they're hard to get a hold of, like I've had an editor that just would not answer my emails back. You know what I mean? That like it would be a week before I would hear back after I emailed a question, or you want that back and forth. You need that back and forth. You need somebody that's available to you as an author. I feel like that's important, is to work back and forth.
I am going to agree. Communication matters so much, and with the agents as well. So when you're looking for red flags, if you have an agent who doesn't return your emails, it's probably not a good fit for you. I'd say to make sure that as a writer, you're being a good fit for the editor. Just don't be a jerk. And I'm not trying to be snotty when I say that, but sometimes as authors, we can get a little overzealous and a little overpassionate about things, and sometimes it's just nice to be good to work with. And so as an editor, when I'm looking for authors that I'm going to work with for my company, I look for authors who are easy to work with, and that they're good writers who are easy to work with. And if that they meet their deadlines, those three things. If you can have two of those three things, great. That's awesome. You at least need two of those three things in order to function appropriately. For me as an editor, I need you to have that. And I look at it, for me as an author, I work very hard to have all three things. I want to just be easy to work with and meet my deadlines and be a nice person and do my best job as a writer. So
yes, I think very important. Thank you, Julie.
I think the deadline thing really goes both ways. You want both the author and the editor should be providing like reasonable expectations of how long something's going to take them. And obviously sometimes, things come up that you can't control. But, in general, either person gives somebody a date that this is when this is happening. You got to be communicative and make sure that you're on the same page about those and meeting those points. Because if you get off schedule, things can go horribly wrong, and just everyone gets stressed and miserable, and stressed editing is not what you want. It's never going to go well.
Yeah, from a publisher perspective, honestly, Julie, you hit the nail on the head, because if you only have one of those three things as an author, I will tell you that honestly, I have canceled authors' contracts before as a senior editor and gone, well, you can't meet a deadline, and you treat the editor who's working with you like crap. And since I manage them and they come to complain to me, unfortunately, you've got to go. And I've canceled people's contracts, and I've only done it twice, and I absolutely hate it. But the publisher is there, the editor is there because they're passionate. about what they're doing. The publisher is there because we're passionate about what we're doing and we want to make money and we want to make everybody happy. And really, for most people, being an author is fun. A lot of people never get to do what I do as a career. You know, it's still always something that's a side gig for them. I'm one of the luckiest people on the planet. And so it's just not worth it for you to be a total jerk to those people. It's not worth it to them and it's not worth it to you. So don't do it. Please don't do it, because don't put your publisher in that position.
No, I 100% agree.
And
even if you have provided the greatest book I've ever read, if you're a jerk, I don't want to work with you. I don't want to deal with it. So.
Yep.
And being a jerk is not like, you know, you're a horrible person, like in general in the rest of your life. Like, you can be a jerk to your editor, even if you're the nicest, most wonderful person ever. If you take like everything out on them, everything that's ever been wrong in your book, and you're like, you're changing things, and I'm freaking out, and you get angry and you get defensive. And if you do that with your editor, like this is their job to make your book good. They want your book to be good. And if you are being angry and defensive and rude to them and not taking the time to pause and be like, okay, this is frustrating, but like it's the book that's frustrating, not the person is trying to be helpful. So even if you're not a jerk, become a jerk if you get too emotional about the editing and don't remember that they're just trying to help you and they're on your side. And you know, there's a difference between like putting your foot down and throwing a tantrum. Make sure you don't ever drift into the tantrum territory.
That's great. Thank you all for that. Let's go ahead now and shift a little bit. We're going to move from editors generally and talk specifically about the copy editor. What is the difference there between, I think so far we've kind of been talking about your first, maybe your pre-submission editor. At what point does a copy editor get involved in the publishing process, and what do you expect from a copy editor?
So copy editing can be used to mean several different things. Which one are we using for this particular panel?
Great add-in, Emma.
so if we're going to go down the line of from your editor who's editing your book, let's say at the publisher, or your freelance editor, either one, right? They're editing for more than just grammar and punctuation and stuff. They're editing for content and story and all those different things. Make sure the plot flows correctly. Make sure Heather's eyes are blue in chapter 2 and still blue in chapter 6 when she comes back, and somehow she hasn't put in colored contacts in the meantime, which happens. It's a regular occurrence. Copy editing is getting down, generally speaking, is more about line editing. It's getting down to grammar and punctuation and stuff like that. And this is the point where, for the most part, you need to stop arguing with your editor. They're a professional. They've got a big, thick Chicago manual style on their desk, and they're looking up when they have questions. And they also know a lot about your genre. For instance, semicolons in dialogue in romance don't work well. Generally, readers don't know what to do with that punctuation. So take it out. Let your editor take it out. Leave it alone, right? So at that point, usually the point when you're not arguing with your editor anymore, because they're just doing grammar and punctuation and stuff like that. And unless that truly changes the meanings of your sentence, usually it doesn't matter. So copy editing is usually that step beyond when you've gone through it with the editor, they've gone through it with you, and they've got all the story wrinkles for the most part out. And so now we're just down to copy, just grammar, punctuation, things like that. And then to segue into the next one without going too far, is if we're going to define things, is a proofreader is the person that goes behind everybody else and sweeps up the stuff we've left on the floor.
That's great. Emma, is that kind of...
My dog's sick at dinner time, so I had to let him out of my room. They're being noisy.
I also have a dog that I'm slightly concerned about.
They're staring at me.
Yeah, these are called canine enhancements when you're having group meetings like this. Mine happens to be a 95-pound German Shepherd. So if he does run in, I'm not being attacked by a police dog. He really is mine. He just wants to be involved. Yeah. Anyway.
I get it.
Emma, did you have something else that you wanted to add on copy editors? It seems like, is there the fact that there might be more than one definition floating out there may be very valuable knowledge for some people watching.
Yeah, so I hear copy editing used for that very grammatical type of editing all the time, and that's the way I personally use it. But before that stage, but after kind of the major plot stuff, there's also kind of a stage that's kind of more like stylistic line editing, where it's more about making sure that the emotions are coming through and your meaning is coming through. You're not accidentally making implications you don't mean, where it's not really grammatical. And there's a lot of interpretation, and it really needs to be really cooperative, and it's less prescriptive and more like, hey, is this what you were meaning to do? And sometimes that's called copy editing. Sometimes it's called line editing or substantive editing. So there's, a lot of names for that, because you apparently can't pick one and just stick with it. And so it's good to clarify whether you're kind of doing that stylistic style of editing or just strictly the grammatical stuff whenever you're working with an editor inside a publishing house or outside of a publishing house, so you're on the same page about what's being looked for in this pass.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll have definitions on their websites as well of like, this is what we consider to be a copy edit or a stylistic edit or a developmental edit. And typically, I will also say this, is typically a publisher won't do a developmental edit with you. That's where you're going to get a freelance editor before you submit. Unless a story is absolutely stellar, it's simply going to cost the publisher too much money to do a developmental edit with you. So unless it's a very minor one, if you need deep developmental plot issues and stuff like that, generally that's going to be a freelance editor that happens before the agent and editor stage.
Speaking of cost, these are different stages of the editing process. Are there specific types of editing that cost more or less than others? Is a proofreader going to cost you much more or less than an editor or developmental editor, for example?
Proofreaders generally much less. Yeah, they're not bringing like a huge. It's not that they're not bringing skills to the table, but they're bringing a different kind of skills to the table. Developmental editor, because it's very collaborative, very relationship based. Here's the thing: is it's really based on time, like how much time it takes. So I can proofread a novel very quickly. A developmental edit, depending upon the author, can sometimes take 3 to 6 months of collaboration and sending drafts back and forth, and sometimes even longer. So that's obviously more expensive. So if you think about the rates that us editors set for word count is based on how much time it's going to take us to edit that word count. There's a time factor behind it that you don't necessarily see that we're figuring into things. So I think that's what you need to realize. The more time the editor has to spend with you, the more it's going to cost you. So the more you can do of that ahead of time before you get to the editor stage, then the better it is. And this is why publishers, for the large part, don't do developmental editing. Once we accept your manuscript, we put it on a publishing calendar and we have some deadline dates. And it's hard to gauge that developmental editing of how long it's going to take. So it's hard to hit those deadlines. And if we miss a deadline, it puts the whole publishing schedule off. So it doesn't just affect your book, it affects everybody's book that's on that entire year calendar. So it's really important. That's why those deadlines are so important when you're working with a publisher.
The proofread comes after all that's been done. The proofread comes after all of the editing has been done. That's like the last thing before it goes to the production team. It's just a quick proofread, make sure the spelling, because there are always typos, there are always spelling errors and a missed comma here or there. And sometimes the proofreader will pick up inconsistencies in the story. It's just one more set of eyes to go on that novel after all of the editing, all of the work has been done. And so, yeah, they aren't nearly as expensive as the full edit.
Yeah. Generally, proofreading comes from the term proof, where you order a print proof or a digital proof, which is exactly what the book's going to look like in print. And they generally look through that and look for errors and spelling mistakes and stuff like that.
Great. Yeah, this is like a quick sidebar, but I remember picking up or finding in a used library book sale an advanced review copy of Twilight, and I picked it. I'd never read Twilight before, but then I opened the cover, and again, advanced review copy. There's this big disclaimer at the beginning that said this is a finished, publication here. And if you find a typo, please send it in to us, right? Which again, I love that that teamwork aspect to it. Again, if you're not used to working with editors and proofreaders, no one is trying to make you look bad. Even at that stage, it's like, if you've got errors, send them in, because this needs to be perfect. So I love that. Julie, did you have anything you wanted to add about copy editors or proofreaders?
Just as a little aside, my son, when he was like 10, came to me one day and he had a book in his hand and he was giggling because he's like, I love it when I find mistakes in books that are published. And I said, you wouldn't if they were your books. It happened to me before, where it's like, oh man, I can't believe, where my editor and I will lament over a Dr. Pepper about how stupid we are that we missed this huge thing. It's like, oh man. No, but as far as the proofreading and copy editing is concerned, copy editing is far more collaborative, and proofreading is just the little fixes, the making sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed and your commas are in the right place, and that you're not using semicolons in the middle of dialogue when you're writing a romance, that sort of thing. You're making sure that you're getting the little bits right. But the things that proofreading, your readers will generally be forgiving of an errant comma. They are going to be far less forgiving of major characterization error, where your character does something that is completely against and contrary to what they were set up to do. So it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, I
would argue that that's true subconsciously, but not consciously. Consciously, they will yell at you about your commas, but not your character.
Yeah, they will.
Well,
you will. You're right.
They also often won't notice. They often also won't notice. It's often just that readers are there for an escapism, and they don't necessarily notice those particular things that as much as we notice them. But I will tell you, another place that you will catch up proofreading mistakes is when you are making audiobooks of your books, and then you have to listen to some narrator narrate them for you. You will go, oh my goodness, we left that in there? Holy crap. But now you can't do anything about it because now it's on audio too, so it's recorded. So it's not like you can go change it and just re-upload a file. No, it's spoken too. So it's horrible to listen to your audiobooks. It's absolutely awful.
Full education about writing from listening to my audiobook once. It's like, oh wow, I will not make some of those mistakes ever again.
That's particularly true because you don't really get the same type of back and forth with audiobook narrators that you would get with editors, right? Like they're in the recording studio, and it's not like authors are sitting there on the other side of the glass in a recording studio with a pen, right? Troy just looks abashed. Sorry, Emma, go ahead.
You will listen to it several times, like in the process, because you'll listen to it. They'll send you a pre-production copy, and you listen to it and stuff like that, and then you listen to it again. But some of them are like things where you can have them restructure a sentence really quick or something like that. But if it's something that's kind of like just that you just totally miss, sometimes you just don't hear it until that last time through the audiobook, and then you're like, it's done. Now it's done. It's like out there in the world forever. So yeah, it's pretty rough.
If any of you ever get the chance, there's a great anecdote that Stephen Fry once shared about him doing the audiobooks for Harry Potter. Emma, do you know what I'm talking about? Pocketed it. The great Stephen Fry could not get the phrase pocketed it down, and J.K. Rowling just would not allow him to change it. And so the way he tells it, the phrase pocketed it then appeared in every subsequent novel after that just to get at him. So that's a great fun story there.
I think audiobooks
go ahead.
have changed. Audiobooks have changed a little bit, at least the way I edit. For certain things, I was listening to a Kurt Vonnegut book once, and I think I got maybe 10 minutes into it and had to turn it off because everything was like he said, she said, they said, he said, she said, he said, she said. I mean, he used said as every dialogue tag everywhere, and it was, which you don't notice that so much when you're reading because you can skip over it, right? Your brain kind of just skips over that, but when you're listening to it, it's annoying. And so dialogue tags are a huge thing when I edit books, because I know all of our books at Immortal Works are going to be on Audible, where we do audiobooks for all of them. And so that's one thing that changed when I heard that changed with my editing is we're not going to do that. we're going to have different dialogue tags, action tags.
Yes, for sure. You almost want to have somebody edit and create for you an audiobook script, honestly, because it's actually different than your regular book, and that is more expensive and it's more challenging and difficult. But it is almost worthwhile after you've listened to a couple of your own audiobooks, you may change your mind about that particular avenue. So anyway, it's just and I say this about 11 audiobooks in, so yeah. It never gets better.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes left. So I just want to give a chance. These are parting last words for I'm making some assumptions about our audience, but I'm assuming people are here because they want to learn more about the editing and proofreading process, and also about agents. Just a quick chance for each of you, 30 seconds of just kind of parting advice on either working with editors, how to find great copy editors, how to find a good agent, anything that might be like a nugget that you wish you would have known earlier in your career.
Oh man, I would just say word of mouth. Word of mouth is key. And when I say talk to your peers, what I mean is your successful peers. And that's not to diss anybody who hasn't been published yet, but I often say it this way, is that writing is practice and publishing is the game. And you want to talk to people that are in the game because they're dealing with these people on a regular basis and they understand how the system works. So talk to experienced authors. Believe me, if you reach out to us, we're perfectly willing to talk. We're not really scary people. Well, anyway. But no, we're not really scary people. So reach out and talk to us. Talk to people that are your peers that are successful and find the right people for you to work with.
Great. How about Holly? You got something?
Yeah, I just think that going into the editing process with the right mindset helps a lot from the outset. To me, I love the editing process now as an author. Because I know that the end product is going to be so much better after my editor gets a hold of it and helps me see some of the holes that I can't see myself. So just go into it with that mindset that it's going to be so much better. It's not always fun, but it's for the betterment of your book, of your novel, of your writing, and you learn as you go. And I think you get better at writing after each round of editing as well. So just the right mindset is important.
I love that. I was recently doing helping a friend with some developmental edits, and she took a feud we have over Chick-fil-A sandwiches to the internet, and it just blew up her author Facebook, and it was like, oh my gosh. Julie, what about you?
I think that editorial process is really important. It really does kind of start with you and writing your very best work and putting your very best work out there, getting the beta readers and the alpha readers. And then after all of that, going and finding an agent who will champion you so that you can have a good relationship with the publisher. But it really does start with read a bunch of editing books, do your best work first, because publishers have a harder time now than ever to justify developmental time spent on an author. They're not going to, coax you through the process. You need to be done with your practice and in the game by the time you're submitting to them. So just make sure you're doing your best work. Do your homework, get everything done first, the best that you can do before you send it off to other people.
I love that. Emma, how about you? Take us home here. You're our last parting words of advice.
My piece of advice for new people who maybe don't know the system and don't really have connections and stuff yet is to make sure to really test the waters and shop around and find the people and relationships that are right for you and are right for your book. Because I mean, even if you write 2 different books, it might be a different editor or a different agent that's right for those books. And make sure to really find someone who is providing you with the specific things you need for this particular book, and the way that they talk to you and the way that they work with you and everything just really needs to suit you. And don't just take the first agent who accepts your book, because that might not necessarily be the best fit. Make sure to really research and test it out, and somebody who's right for you, because once you've made that decision, it's hard to go back and change it. But if you pick the right person, it'll really just push you forward and make sure that your book is as successful as it possibly can be, and that the process is as pleasant.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to all of you, our fabulous panelists, and thanks to everyone watching. Well, I've loved seeing your comments come in, your questions. I know there are a lot of questions that we couldn't get to. I don't know if any of the panelists are planning on heading into the public Discord, but I know typically there has been discussion from the panels continuing in the Discord server. In the particular room, we are in the McCaffrey room, and so the discussion can go on there. And are any panelists? Any panelists have time to just kind of go? And should anyone expect you in there for further questions? It is totally fine, of course. It's not.
I actually have a class next hour, so but I will be available after that.
I'm free next hour if people have questions for me.
So yeah, you can go and get the inside scoop with Emma in the Discord. But thanks everyone for coming, and thanks again to our panelists. And I hope you guys have a really fabulous rest of the Life, the Universe, and Everything Symposium.